They sent an ultimatum, so we sent a mirror. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the fleet carrier Resilience, her form a still point, in a storm of quiet efficiency. Around her, the holographic command theater painted the Oakhaven system in stark blues and threatening reds. The blue was theirs, the 5 ships of the Terran Third Fleet, a pinprick of defiance. The red was the Xylos Ascendancy, a barbed cage of 30 warships locked around the colony world, its orbital sky choked with their angular obsidian hulls. A crimson timer pulsed silently in the corner of the main display. Each second it shed a visceral blow. 36 hours until compliance or sterilization. Her second-in-command, Commander Jian Li, kept her eyes fixed on the tactical plot, her posture rigid with contained energy. All fleet elements report ready, Admiral. The convoy is holding formation 5,000 kilometers off our stern, cloaked but straining. The scent of ozone from the overworked environmental controls was sharp in the recycled air. Every surface vibrated with the low thrum of the ship's gravitic heart, a constant reminder of the power held in careful check. The ultimatum was simple surrender Oakhaven's entire energy grid and its population to indentured service or be erased. They believed an account could only be settled in blood. Solon final projection. Rostova said, her voice calm, and measured a counterpoint to the relentless clock. The air before her shimmered, coalescing into the serene androgynous avatar of the fleet mind. Solon's form was woven from pure data, a tranquil waterfall of light particles against the raw tension of the bridge. Admiral, the calculus remains unchanged. The AI's voice was smooth, a composite of 1,000,000 harmonious tones. Direct confrontation yields a 98.7% probability of total fleet loss. A blockade run as planned carries a 76.4% chance of convoy destruction and a 41% chance of losing at least one capital ship. The civilian cost of non-action is 100%, Rostova stated flatly. It was not a question. It was the anchor of their entire reality. She felt the faint rhythmic pulse of her own heart in her suit's cuff monitor, a steady beat against the cold logic of the numbers. The glare of the tactical display reflected in her eyes, showing a fleet outnumbered and outgunned, but not yet broken. We came to teach them a different kind of math. On Oakhaven, a child named Alara huddled with her family in a public shelter, the low ceilings seeming to press down with the weight of the sky. She held a small, smooth river stone, its coolness a comfort against her palm. Her father had told her to watch the heavens, that help would come not as a firestorm, but as a flicker of hope. He spoke of the Third Fleet, not as warriors but as teachers, though she couldn't understand what lesson could be taught to the silent, menacing ships that now owned their dawn. She squeezed the stone, imagining it was a seed for a new star. Back on the Resilience, Rostova traced a line on the holotank indicating a corridor of space deceptively clear of Xylos patrols. Their formation is a broadcast of arrogance, Solon. It is designed to be visually intimidating, not tactically sound. They assume we will see the wall and either retreat or shatter ourselves against it. The console beside her hummed its heat, a familiar presence. The light cast long shadows that danced as crew members moved with practiced silence. Their pride was the key to the cage. Commander Lee, begin the overture, Rostova ordered. Launch decoy swarm Alpha. Let's give them something to watch. Lee's fingers flew across her console. Decoys away, Admiral, running hot and loud, mimicking the energy signature of the entire convoy. On the main screen, a cluster of new icons flared to life, accelerating toward the Xylos blockade on a trajectory that was both bold and foolish. It was a feint, a magician's flourish designed to draw the eye. The Xylos responded with textbook precision. A squadron of their smaller, faster ships broke formation, moving to intercept the phantom targets. They moved like predators, sleek and certain. They're taking the bait. Lee murmured a hint of admiration in her tone. Their discipline is impressive. Rostova nodded her gaze, unwavering. Discipline without adaptability is just a prettier form of failure. She could feel the deck plates shift slightly as the Resilience adjusted its own position, a giant holding its breath. Hold the line until the last possible moment. Solon, deploy the lattice. Rostova commanded. From the Resilience and its 4 sister ships, a swarm of thousands of tiny projectors shot forth, not toward the enemy, but into the empty space between the human fleet and the blockade. They were smaller than a fist, inert, and cold, invisible to all but the most sensitive scans. They arranged themselves in a complex 3-dimensional grid, a ghost of a structure hanging in the void. This was the true heart of the plan. The Xylos ships obliterated the decoys with contemptuous ease, bursts of emerald energy tearing through empty space. Their commander, watching from the bridge of his own monolithic vessel, would be feeling the first flush of confirmation bias. The humans were predictable. The ultimatum would be met. Their doctrine held true. But Rostova was watching a different display, one that showed the mirror lattice settling into its final, perfect alignment. We would show them their own face and let them count the cost. A low hiss of coolant venting through a nearby conduit punctuated the bridge's silence. It was a sound of patience. The lattice is set, Admiral Solon reported. Calibrated and interlinked. Ready to reflect on your command. The AI's avatar flickered a subtle tell that it was processing immense amounts of targeting data, preparing to bend light and energy in ways the Xylos had never conceived. Rostova's eyes were fixed on the real convoy, still hidden in the fleet's shadow. Signal the convoy, she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. Their window is about to open. Full burn on my mark. She took a deep breath, the sterile air filling her lungs. The countdown timer on the screen pulsed, a relentless heartbeat counting down to oblivion. But now it felt less like a threat and more like a deadline for a lesson to be delivered. The first part of that lesson was about to begin. The universe does not bargain, but it does keep a perfect ledger. The Xylos interceptors are returning to the main formation, Lee reported, her knuckles white, where she gripped the console's edge. They've cataloged the decoy signatures. They think the show is over. Rostova allowed a thin smile. The show is just beginning. Solon, activate the lattice. Target their primary sensor arrays. Don't blind them permanently. Just give them a new perspective. The mirror is the cruelest teacher. With a command that was little more than a whisper of data, the lattice came alive. It did not glow or emit energy. It simply began to reflect. The faint ambient light of the distant star Oakhaven orbited was gathered, focused, and redirected with impossible precision. Beams of harmless, focused starlight began to paint the Xylos ships, not with damaging intensity, but with the calculated glare of 1,000 suns aimed directly into their sensitive sensor apertures. On the Xylos bridge, screens would be flaring with incoherent data, their clear view of the battlefield dissolving into a blinding fog of their own star's light. Lattice active, Solon confirmed. The Xylos fleet is experiencing systemic sensor overload. Their tactical awareness is reduced by an estimated 82%. Now Rostova commanded, slamming her hand down on the armrest of her chair. The impact a sharp crack in the quiet room. Signal the convoy. Go, go, go. In the shadow of the Terran fleet, the 6 bulky transport ships of the civilian convoy ignited their drives, pouring every ounce of power into a desperate sprint toward the now unguarded corridor. This is the anchor. Hold fast. The transports accelerated with a fury born of desperation. They were not warships. They were vessels of life carrying food, medicine, and atmospheric processors for the besieged colony. On the main display, their icons shot forward a streak of hopeful blue through the fractured red cage. The Xylos were disoriented, their formidable fleet momentarily blinded by their own sun. It was as if the universe itself had decided to hold a mirror up to their arrogance. A low vibration ran through the resilience, the resonance of the lattice projectors holding their precise, delicate alignment against the pull of gravity and solar winds. "They are firing blind!" Lee exclaimed as blooms of unfocused energy erupted from the Xylos ships, lashing out into empty space. "They can't resolve a target. They're just angry." "Anger is a poor substitute for strategy," Rostova said calmly. Her heart pounded a frantic drum against her ribs, but her voice was steel. This was the first test of their doctrine, a doctrine of minimal force and maximal consequence. They weren't destroying the Xylos. They were simply using their own environment to show them they were not in control. Every action must be weighed. For a few precious minutes, the plan held perfectly. The convoy plunged deeper into the system, their velocity a testament to their engineers. But the Xylos were not fools. Their commander Kalen was a veteran of 100 campaigns of enforced compliance. He recognized the nature of the deception, if not its precise mechanism. Admiral Solon's voice cut through the tense quiet. "The Xylos are rerouting power. They are initiating a wide-spectrum sensor pulse, a brute force attempt to burn through the interference." The console beside Jian Li chirped urgently. Heat bloom detected from the Xylos command ship. "It's a massive energy spike." This was the escalation. The unexpected move that could unravel everything. Rostova had anticipated a counter, but not one so crude and powerful. The pulse would be an indiscriminate hammer blow, potentially revealing the convoy's exact position. "Brace for the reckoning. So long can the lattice compensate?" Rostova asked, her mind racing through contingencies. "Negative, Admiral. The pulse is too powerful. The lattice can diffuse it, but it cannot hide the convoy's engine flares from a blast of that magnitude. Probability of convoy detection is now 99.3%. The warmth from the displays suddenly felt oppressive, the air thick with the promise of failure. The Xylos were willing to blind themselves completely for a chance to find their prey. Rostova's jaw tightened. There was only one move left, a costly one she had hoped to avoid. "Commander Lee, order the frigate Stalwart to break formation. They are to move to intercept trajectory with the convoy and engage their Mirage emitters. Full power." Lee's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Admiral, the Stalwart will be completely exposed. The Mirage system will draw every ounce of their fire." The Mirage was a new form of electronic warfare, projecting a perfect ghost-like energy signature of a much larger ship. It was the ultimate decoy. "A leader's duty is to shield the flock. That is the point," Commander Rostova said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The convoy carries life. The Stalwart carries a duty." On the tactical plot, the small icon of the frigate detached from the main fleet, a lone wolf moving to protect the pack. It accelerated on a desperate, beautiful arc, its engines burning hot. It was positioning itself to become the brightest thing in the sky, a tempting, irresistible target. Aboard the Stalwart, a young ensign gripped his console. His breath held tight. He could see the convoy ships out of his viewport, lumbering giants he was now tasked with protecting. The ship's captain, a grim-faced veteran, gave the order, and the ensign flipped the final sequence of switches. A deep hum vibrated through the frigate's deck, a feeling of immense power gathering. The hull groaned in protest, the ship's systems straining under the unprecedented energy load. The Mirage was active. Some debts are paid in advance. The Xylos sensor pulse washed through the system, a wave of raw energy. As Solon predicted, it overwhelmed the mirror lattice and reflected off the fleeing convoy. Their positions were instantly revealed. But at the same moment, the Stalwart's Mirage system blared to life, screaming into the electromagnetic spectrum. It projected the energy signature of a Terran battlecruiser, a threat 10 times its actual size, positioned aggressively between the Xylos and their prize. To the blinded Xylos fleet, it was as if a giant had suddenly appeared on the battlefield. It was a clear and immediate threat, one their doctrine demanded they annihilate. Their turning Lee breathed a mixture of awe and fear in her voice. Multiple ships are acquiring a firing solution on the stalwart. Rostova watched the red targeting lines converge on the single small blue icon. They see a monster, so they will fight it like one. Let's hope the stalwart's shields can weather the sermon. They wrote the test. We are merely the proctors. Emerald lances of energy fired with renewed focus crossed the void. They weren't the wild, angry shots from before. These were aimed kiloton-yield beams of coherent plasma, and they were all erected at the frigate. The stalwart's icon on the screen flickered violently as the first salvos hit. Its shields flared, absorbing impacts that would have vaporized a lesser ship, but they were buckling under the strain. The cost of this gambit was now being paid, measured in scorched armor and failing capacitors. Shields at 40%, and dropping Lai reported, her voice strained. Hull breaches on decks 5 and 7. Life support is holding, but they are taking a pounding. Rostova felt each report like a physical blow. She knew the crew of that ship. She had personally promoted its captain. Solon, what is the convoy's status? She asked, forcing her attention back to the primary objective. The convoy has cleared the primary threat zone, Admiral, the AI replied. They are proceeding to Oakhaven under their own power. Their survival probability is now above 95%. A sacrifice is not a loss, it is a purchase. A cheer threatened to erupt on the bridge, but it was choked back by the sight of the stalwart's struggle. The frigate was dying, but it was dying well. Commander Lee signaled the stalwart. Tell them to vent plasma from their port nacelle. Make it look like a catastrophic engine failure, Rostova ordered. Then kill the mirage emitter and play dead. With any luck, the Xylos will assume their threat is neutralized and turn their attention back to us. The stalwart obeyed. A brilliant plume of superheated plasma erupted from its side, a peacock's tail of false destruction. The ship's lights went dark, its energy signature dropping to near zero. It began to tumble, a lifeless piece of metal adrift in space. On the Xylos bridges, it would look like a confirmed kill, a satisfying victory. They had met a challenge and destroyed it just as their doctrine dictated. Their attention, their arrogance, would now return to the main fleet. The account is not yet closed. Rostova watched the Xylos ships, their movements becoming more organized as their sensors cleared. They were re-establishing their cage, but it was a cage with a hole in it. The convoy was through. The colony would be resupplied. The timer in the corner of the display was still ticking down, but it had lost its power over them. It was no longer a deadline for Oakhaven's survival, but for the Xylos fleet's reckoning. Solon, give me a damage report and casualty estimate for the stalwart. Rostova said, her voice low. The AI's avatar shimmered. Structural integrity is compromised, but the Citadel armor held. Life support is stable. Medical teams report 17 wounded, 2 in critical condition. 0 fatalities. A collective sigh of relief washed over the bridge, a human sound in a sterile world of light and data. The ship's heartbeat monitor on Rostova's cuff, which had been racing, slowed to a steady rhythm. They had paid a price, but it was in blood, not lives. A wounded wolf is still a wolf. The Xylos are reforming, Admiral Lee stated, her professionalism returning. They are broadcasting on all channels. It's Kalen, their fleet commander. The main screen flickered, replacing the tactical map with the face of a Xylos. He was humanoid with sharp avian features and eyes that burned with cold fire. His face was a mask of rigid certainty. Fleet of the Terran aberrants, his voice boomed, translated into perfect sterile English. Your pathetic deception has failed. You have sacrificed one of your ships for nothing. The ultimatum stands. The colony will be forfeit. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Rostova stood up, stepping into the holographic projector's full light. She was now visible to the Xylos commander, a single human figure against the backdrop of her command deck. Commander Kalen, she replied, her voice calm and carrying the full authority of the Terran fleet. You misunderstand the nature of our exchange. We have not sacrificed a ship. We have merely made a down payment on the lesson you are about to learn. The scent of recycled air seemed to fade, replaced by the electric tang of imminent conflict. The lesson is always taught. The only question is the price. You speak in foolish riddles, Kalen sneered. My doctrine is clear. My purpose is absolute. This system belongs to the ascendancy. Your presence here is an error to be corrected. Rostova saw it then, the absolute, unshakable faith in his own power. He wasn't just following orders. He was a zealot, a true believer in the righteousness of the ultimatum. He could not conceive of a reality where his will was not the final word. Your doctrine is a ledger written entirely in red, Commander Rostova said, her voice hardening. You see only two outcomes, submission or destruction. We are here to present a third option, accountability. She glanced at Solon's avatar, a silent communion of purpose passing between human and machine. The AI's form pulsed with a soft, steady light. A mystery began to form in Rostova's mind. What kind of culture produces a doctrine so rigid? What fear drives such a need for absolute compliance? It was a question for later. The immediate issue was the tactical reality. We will balance the books. Empty words, Kalen spat, his image flickering with contempt. Your fleet is a fraction of my own. Your position is untenable. Your continued resistance is an illogical emotional response. Your AI should have informed you of this. Rostova looked at Solon, who met her gaze. Solon's calculus is comprehensive, Commander. It includes variables you have not yet considered. The fleet mind's serene voice was an unnerving counterpoint to Kalen's fury. It was the calm of a mathematician who has already solved the equation. A faint, almost undetectable energy signature pulsed from the Xylos fleet. It was a pattern Solon had been quietly monitoring for hours. It was inefficient, a constant low-level broadcast that served no tactical purpose. It was the AI had concluded a feed. The Xylos weren't just blockading a planet. They were putting on a performance for an audience back home, a live broadcast of their glorious, inevitable victory. The inefficiency wasn't a flaw. It was the entire point. Their stage will become our classroom. Rostova's plan had been built around that single arrogant assumption. Kalen believed his power was absolute because his entire society was watching him prove it. He was not just a commander. He was a high priest performing a sacred ritual of dominance. The human fleet was not just an enemy. They were the unbelievers, the final piece of the ceremony. And that was the flaw in his perfect, rigid doctrine. He was so focused on the performance that he had forgotten to watch the audience. Commander Lee Rostova said, turning away from Kalen's sneering face, effectively dismissing him. Bring the resilience about. New heading 270 Mark IV. Prepare to open the corridor. Lee's eyes widened slightly. The maneuver was counterintuitive. It would expose their flank and seemingly invite the Xylos to attack. It looked for all the world like a retreat, or worse, a strategic blunder of epic proportions. Trust the math, trust the mirror. Admiral Lee questioned, her voice hesitant for the first time. That course will take us directly into their optimal firing range. Precisely, Rostova replied. Solon, begin Phase 2. Reposition the lattice. I want every single projector retasked. New function broadcast amplification. Target the Xylos homeworld. The pieces were now moving into place for the final act. The first part of the lesson had been about deception. This next part would be about truth. The thousands of tiny mirror projectors scattered across millions of kilometers of space began to pivot. They were no longer positioned to reflect starlight. They were now aligning to catch the Xylos fleet's own data stream, their performance broadcast, and magnify it, reshape it, and send it hurtling back toward its source, but not before adding their own commentary. The low hum of the ship seemed to change pitch, a rising note of anticipation. We will not shout, we will echo. On Oakhaven, the first of the convoy ships began its final descent. The emergency supplies were a reality, a tangible refutation of the Xylos ultimatum. In the shelter, Ilara's father pointed to a small screen showing the ship's landing. "See," he whispered to his daughter, his voice thick with emotion. "They didn't bring a sword. They brought a shield." Ilara looked from the screen to the smooth stone in her hand, understanding dawning in her young eyes. Kalen on his bridge watched the Terran flagship turn. He saw it as the beginning of a panicked, disorganized retreat. It was the confirmation he craved. The humans were breaking. Their illogical defiance was collapsing in the face of his superior will and firepower. He gave the order to advance, to press the advantage, and turn the retreat into a complete rout. His ships moved forward, tightening the noose, their movements sleek and predatory. He was so confident he didn't even notice the subtle change in the energy readings around him. Pride is a blindfold worn willingly. "Admiral, the lattice is realigned," Solon announced. "We have captured their public broadcast feed. We are also adding our own sensor data tactical displays and an unedited recording of your conversation with Commander Kalen. It is ready to be sent." Rostova nodded, her gaze fixed on the advancing Xylos fleet. They were moving exactly as she had predicted, falling into the trap not with a bang, but with the quiet certainty of the arrogant. "Commander Lee, open a fleet-wide channel. I want every one of our crew to see this." The main screen of the Resilience split. On one side was the tactical display showing the Xylos fleet surging forward. On the other side was what the Xylos public was seeing, a highly curated version of the battle, showing only their ships' effortless destruction of the decoys and the death of the stalwart. It was a perfect piece of propaganda. Rostova watched it for a moment, a cold anger building within her. This wasn't war. This was theater, and the price of admission was the lives of everyone on Oakhaven. "The truth is a beacon, not a club," Solon Rostova said, her voice like ice. "Begin the broadcast. Let the people of the Xylos Ascendancy see the battle as it truly is. Show them the convoy they were told we sacrificed. Show them the colony they were told was already broken. And show them the full, unedited text of their commander's ultimatum." The AI's avatar gave a single, slow nod. "Amplifying and transmitting now, Admiral. The signal will arrive at their homeworld in 11 minutes. Across the void, the mirror lattice, once a tool of misdirection, became a lens of truth. It gathered Kalen's triumphant broadcast, wrapped it in the hard data of reality, and hurled it back into the heart of his own empire. The trap was sprung, and the kill box was not a section of space. It was the court of public opinion. Kalen was no longer a commander in a battle. He was a defendant in a trial, and all the evidence was being presented to the jury. Let the tally be made public. The Xylos ships continued their advance oblivious. They were preparing to deliver the final crushing blow. Kalen was likely already composing his victory speech. He was a figure of immense power at the head of an unstoppable fleet, about to secure a great prize for his people. He was also, at that exact moment, the most exposed being in the galaxy. His every action, his every word laid bare for his entire civilization to judge. Rostova watched the tactical display, her expression unreadable. She had turned their greatest strength, their rigid performative doctrine, into their greatest vulnerability. She hadn't outgunned them. She had outthought them. She had refused to play their game of destruction and had instead started a new one, a game of consequences. The air on the bridge was still thick with the weight of what was to come. The coolant hissed a soft, steady sigh. The reckoning is not an attack. It is a revelation. Solon, project the probable response, Rostova ordered. The AI's avatar shimmered and a series of complex data models scrolled beside it. The initial reaction on the Xylos homeworld will be disbelief followed by confusion. Our data packet is triple encrypted and verified with our own fleet's quantum signature. It cannot be dismissed as forgery. Public sentiment models predict a 73% probability of civil unrest within their communication networks, rising to 90% as they correlate our data with the convoy's arrival at Oakhaven. This was the core of her strategy. She would not win by breaking their ships, but by breaking their consensus. She would force the cost of their ultimatum doctrine not onto her fleet, but back onto the society that created it. The ultimatum was only powerful if its brutality was hidden behind a veneer of necessity and strength. She was tearing that veneer away, showing it for the hollow threat it was. The heat from the command console felt like a small, warm assurance against the coldness of the void. A doctrine built on lies shatters under the light. 11 minutes until broadcast arrival. Lee announced, her voice a low murmur. The human fleet held its position, a deceptively passive lure. The Xylos were now less than a minute from optimal firing range. Their weapon ports were opening, glowing with the emerald energy that was their trademark. They were preparing for a volley that would cripple the Terran flagship. The tension on the bridge was a physical thing, a pressure in the air. "They're powering weapons," Lee said, her voice tight. "Admiral, they are going to fire." Rostova did not flinch. Her eyes were on the clock, counting down the seconds until the truth arrived. She had made a promise to teach a lesson, and class was about to be in session. The final component of the trap was about to snap shut, and it had nothing to do with weapons or shields. It had to do with a simple, unchangeable fact of the universe. You cannot outrun the consequences of your own words. "Hold steady," Commander Rostova said, her voice a calming anchor in the rising storm of anticipation. Let them commit. She could feel the vibration of her own ship's systems, the barely contained power waiting for a command. She watched the red icons of the Xylos fleet their movements so full of lethal confidence. They believed they were writing the end of the story. They had no idea that their part was already written, and the epilogue was about to be delivered to their own people. The final seconds ticked away. The truth was about to make landfall. The sky burned emerald. Kalen's fleet fired as one, a coordinated volley of annihilation aimed at the heart of the Terran flagship. The space between the fleets sizzled, and for a terrifying second, every screen on the Resilience's bridge whited out. A colossal shudder ran through the ship, a deep, bone-jarring groan of stressed metal and protesting gravity plates. Red emergency lighting flickered on, painting the disciplined chaos in bloody hues. The sharp, acrid smell of burnt wiring and vaporized ablative armor filled the air, a scent of violence that no filter could scrub away. "Impact!" Lee yelled, her hands gripping her console to keep her steady. Forward shields buckled. "We have hull breaches across decks 3 through 6. Energy conduits are overloading." Sparks rained down from a compromised ceiling panel, a dangerous firefly in the gloom. The deck tilted violently, then stabilized with another groan. Rostova stood unmoved. Her boots planted her form an anchor against the ship's agony. She had expected this. It was part of the calculation, a cost entered into the ledger willingly. Their fury was the price of admission. "Solon status," she said, her voice cutting through the rising chorus of alarms. "The primary volley has been weathered." Admiral, the AI's voice was unnervingly calm, a river of logic flowing through a burning forest. Structural integrity is at 78%. Main reactor is stable. The ship is wounded, but she is not broken. The AI's avatar flickered a sign of the immense data it was processing to keep the ship alive. And Admiral, the broadcast has arrived. A profound stillness fell over the bridge, more powerful than the alarms. The crew, even as they fought to contain fires and reroute power, paused for a fraction of a second. The seed of their strategy, planted so carefully, had just broken ground on a world light minutes away. They had paid in steel and fire, and now they would see if the purchase was worth the price. A truth once seen cannot be unseen. Monitor their internal fleet communications, Rostova ordered. Show me the first cracks in the wall. The main screen, no longer filled with Kalen's face, now showed a cascading stream of encrypted Xylos data, with Solon's translation running alongside. At first it was standard battle chatter. Then a query from a Xylos cruiser captain to his squadron leader command. We are receiving priority override signals from Homeworld Command. They are conflicting. A moment later, another all-ships battlenet is flooded with civilian-banned traffic. Authenticated. What are we seeing? Kalen's voice suddenly cut across the channel, no longer the composed zealot, but a man losing his grip. Silence, all channels are to be restricted to my command authority. Ignore the ghost signals, fire the second volley. But the order was not followed by the instantaneous, disciplined response from before. There was a hesitation, a lag of a few seconds that spoke volumes. The emerald glow of their weapon ports, which had been building again, flickered and dimmed on several of the ships. A doctrine has no answers for a question it forbids. They are breaking formation. Lee said, her voice filled with a stunned disbelief. They aren't retreating. They are just stopping. Several ships have powered down their main weapon systems. The rigid, perfect cage of the Xylos fleet was fracturing, dissolving into a confused cluster of individual ships, their certainty shattered. They were a body whose brain was now at war with itself. The crew of the Resilience watched their own damage control efforts momentarily forgotten, captivated by the sight of an ideology collapsing in real time. Aboard his flagship, Kalen must have been seeing the same thing. His perfect instrument of compliance, his fleet was refusing to play. His direct line to Homeworld was likely screaming at him, demanding explanations for images of a civilian convoy safely docked at Oakhaven, for the unedited audio of his own brutal ultimatum, now echoing through his society's networks. His stage had been turned into a courtroom, and the audience was now the jury. A low, continuous hiss from a damaged life support vent was the only sound for a long moment on Rostova's bridge. The mirror shows not what you are, but what you do. Admiral Solon stated, its voice cutting through the silence. Commander Kalen is opening a direct channel. To you. On screen, Rostova said. Kalen's face appeared again, but the mask of arrogant certainty was gone, replaced by a contorted visage of pure fury. The avian features were sharp, his eyes burning not with cold fire, but with the hot, desperate rage of a man who has lost everything. What have you done? He shrieked, his voice distorted by passion. This is not war, this is a perversion, a trick. I have done nothing but show your people the truth, Commander Rostova replied, her voice level. I held up a mirror. It is not my fault you did not like the reflection. This was the core of the mystery, she realized. The Xylos doctrine wasn't just about control. It was about the illusion of righteous control. Their fear was not of defeat, but of exposure, of being seen by their own as dishonorable. A liar hates nothing more than an echo of his own voice. You have poisoned my honor, Kalen screamed. You have turned my people against me with your cowardly data lies. The data is clean, Commander, and the words were your own, Rostova countered, her patience wearing thin. This conflict is over. Your ultimatum is broken. Your blockade is meaningless. Order your ships to stand down and withdraw from the system. There does not need to be any more cost today. She could feel the faint thrum of her ship's engines, a wounded beast, but one whose heart was still strong. For a moment, Kalen stared at her, his breathing ragged. Then a terrible, chilling clarity entered his eyes. It was the look of a man who, seeing no way out, decides to burn the entire world down with him. "If my honor is to be forfeit," he whispered, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "then it will be forfeit in the fires of a world I have sworn to claim. The ultimatum will be fulfilled. Not on your fleet, but on the colony." The tactical display flared with a new, terrifying icon. Kalen's flagship was rerouting all power to its primary weapon, a spinal lance designed for planetary bombardment. Some men would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. "He's targeting Oakhaven," Lee breathed, horror dawning on her face. "He's going to sterilize the planet from here." This was the final escalation. The act of a cornered animal lashing out with suicidal ferocity. He could no longer win, so he would simply make everyone lose. He would make the cost so high that his disgrace would be drowned in the blood of millions. Rostova's mind raced. They were too far away to intercept him directly. The resilience was damaged. A direct assault was impossible. Her conflict triangle, her morality, Solon's calculus, the enemy's doctrine was now at its sharpest point. To destroy Kalen's ship would be to validate the very doctrine of violence she had come to dismantle. It would make him a martyr. But to do nothing was to allow genocide. The console in front of her felt hot to the touch, a conduit for the impossible decision she had to make. The final question is always the same. "Who are you?" Solon Rostova said, her voice a low, urgent command. "Bring the stalwart back online. Full power to the Mirage emitter. But I want a new projection. Not a battlecruiser. Project the energy signature of Kalen's own command ship. A perfect mirror image. Position it directly between him and the planet." The AI processed the command without question. Calculus confirms this action introduces a novel variable with a high probability of inducing command-level paralysis. Jin Rostova said, her eyes locked on Kalen's ship. "Signal all other Xylos vessels. Open channel. No encryption. Broadcast this message on a continuous loop. Commander Kalen has violated ascendancy law. He is acting without authority. Do not obey his commands. A true commander protects the people, he does not slaughter them." It was a gamble, an appeal to the very honor Kalen claimed to have lost. She was betting that his crews were soldiers, not murderers. A soldier's first duty is to their conscience. Across the system, the supposedly dead frigate Stalwart surged with light and power. Its systems, patched and held together by a desperate crew, screamed in protest, but they held. The Mirage emitter, a tool of deception, was now repurposed as a tool of moral clarity. It cast an invisible net of energy, creating a perfect ghost of Kalen's flagship, an identical twin standing defiantly in the path of his apocalyptic weapon. At the same time, Rostova's message flooded the Xylos comms, not as an attack, but as an appeal. On Kalen's bridge, alarms must have blared. A new target, identical to his own ship, had appeared from nowhere. His own fleet was being told he was a traitor. The weapon was seconds from firing, but where should it aim? At the ghost. At the planet, his tactical screen would be a map of his own shattered psyche. His entire reality was being inverted. His own tools and tactics turned against him with devastating precision. You cannot kill a reflection without striking yourself. It's working. Lee whispered. The energy charge on his main weapon is fluctuating. On the tactical display, other Xylos ships began to move. They were not attacking the Terran fleet. They were moving to surround their own commander, their weapon ports glowing not with threat, but with warning. They were cutting him off. They were enforcing the conscience Rostova had appealed to. They were choosing their own honor over his suicidal orders. Then a new voice cut across the open channel, crisp and authoritative. A Xylos voice. This is First Officer Taran of the Ascendancy vessel Vigilance. Commander Kalen is relieved of command effective immediately by authority of the Fleet Honor Accord. He is to be taken into custody. The ultimatum is rescinded. We are standing down. The message repeated, and on the main screen, Kalen's flagship powered down its spinal lance, the angry emerald glow fading into darkness. The siege was broken not by a final glorious battle, but by a quiet collective choice. The strongest cage is the one you cannot see. A wave of cheers and relieved shouts finally erupted on the bridge of the Resilience. The tension held for so long broke like a fever. Crew members hugged others slumped into their chairs, the adrenaline leaving them weak. Rostova allowed herself a single deep breath, feeling the months of planning, the years of training settle into this one quiet moment of victory. She looked at Solon's serene, glowing form. The AI had provided the numbers, but the choices had been human. Medical teams report the critical crew from the Stalwart are now stable. Lee said, her voice thick with emotion as she relayed the message. The ship is holding. They want to know if they can come home. Rostova nodded, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. Tell them to come home, Commander. Tell them their account has been paid in full. The cost had been real, a battered frigate, a wounded flagship, dozens of crew members injured. But the victory was absolute. The ledger is written. The debt is paid. In the days that followed, the Xylos fleet withdrew not as a conquered enemy, but as a chastened one. First Officer Taran, now acting commander, opened formal diplomatic channels. The first item on the public record broadcast to both their civilizations was a formal disavowal of the Ultimatum doctrine. It was declared an archaic and dishonorable policy, its privileges rescinded, its use outlawed by their own high command. The precedent was set not by force of arms, but by force of truth. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. On Oakhaven, Ilara watched as the last of the menacing obsidian ships warped out of her sky, leaving only the familiar stars. The Riverstone was still in her pocket, a small, solid reminder of the fleet that had come not to fight a war, but to teach a lesson. She saw the Resilience in high orbit, a silver sentinel standing guard its lights, a comforting presence. The fear that had lived in her heart for weeks was finally gone, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder. Open the gates. Let the future in. A week later, Admiral Rostova stood on the observation deck of the Resilience, looking down at the mending world of Oakhaven. Commander Lee stood beside her. The ship was undergoing repairs, the sounds of work a constant reassuring hum. The scent of hot metal and welding fumes drifted faintly through the corridors. The Honor Accord, Rostova mused. Solon's analysis suggested they had a cultural failsafe like that, a way to remove a commander who had gone rogue. But it had never been invoked on a fleet-wide scale before. You forced them to choose between their doctrine and their honor, Lee said. You gambled that they would choose honor. It wasn't a gamble, Gian Rostova corrected her gently. It was an assumption of character. The most powerful weapon in any arsenal is the belief that your enemy is at their core better than their worst impulses. We didn't defeat them. We simply reminded them who they were. Solon's avatar shimmered into existence beside them. Admiral, a message from Homeworld. They are calling this the Rostova Doctrine. We do not draw lines in the sand. We hold up a mirror. Rostova looked away from the planet and out toward the deep black, where other stars held other worlds, other conflicts yet to come. The fight was never truly over, but the nature of the fight could be changed. You did not have to become a monster to defeat one. You could win by being smarter, by being braver, and by having an unshakable faith in the clarifying power of the truth. You just had to be willing to pay the price to make sure that truth was heard. Power is not the ability to destroy. That is merely force. True power is the ability to change a mind without firing a shot, to settle an account, without bloodshed, to teach a lesson that is remembered not in fear but in wisdom. It is the quiet, unyielding strength that forces an opponent to confront the consequences of their own choices, and in so doing, become something new. The mirror lattice projectors, their task complete, cooled to the pewter gray of inactive metal drifting invisibly in the dark. The lesson is over.